Hey guys, tonight we're gonna look at the kind of love that feels inevitable. The kind that appears from nowhere but moves through your life like it's been waiting forever. Picture this: dim streetlights, two strangers brushing shoulders in silence, and something unspoken crackling in the air between them. Or a glance across a crowded room that leaves your heart tangled in a story you haven't even lived yet. Yeah, that. And you probably won't survive this with your old ideas about love intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it in your corner of the world right now? Allow the noise to fade, the stillness to bloom, and together we'll begin. You felt it, that strange, magnetic pull. When someone locks eyes with you a little longer than makes sense, when they talk to you like they've known you for lifetimes, when their gaze doesn't land on your clothes or your smile or your timing, but on something underneath. It's not chemistry, not charm, not coincidence. It's something deeper, older, wiser. Like you were meant to fill a space they didn't know they were missing until you walked in. But here's the secret: none of it starts with you. That gravitational pull, that emotional undertow that swirls between two people, it began long before you met, and it began inside them, in the unconscious folds of their psyche, in memories they've misplaced or emotions they never processed. You didn't create the pull, you simply stepped into its path. You became the living symbol of something unresolved, a shape their inner world had already carved out and left waiting for someone to fill. The truth is, most people don't fall in love with you. They fall in love with what you awaken. That's what makes this kind of connection so confusing, because it feels real, electric, destined. But there's an invisible thread tying their heart to yours, and that thread is made of longing, not for your voice or your laugh or your timing, but for themselves, for a missing part, for a quality they exiled long ago. It's like their unconscious sees you and says, "There, that's it, that's what we've been missing," and you feel it too. The weight of their attention, the glow of being seen, the strange sense that you matter deeply, even when they barely know you. But deep down, it's not about you. Not really. It's about the part of their inner world you've accidentally stepped into. You're not just a person, you're an image, a mirror, a symbol from their own unfinished story. That's why this kind of love can feel both thrilling and strange, because you're being seen, but not fully, not truthfully. You're being held inside a dream that doesn't entirely belong to you. And while it might make you feel powerful or chosen or special, it's not a power you actually control. The moment you stop reflecting the image they've cast onto you, the spell can break. And suddenly, the person who once saw stars in your silence can barely meet your eyes. But in this first stage, before the break, this is when the magic takes hold. It's soft, hypnotic. The way they lean closer when you speak, the way your laughter feels like music to them, the way they seem to know your favorite colors, your quiet moments, your secrets before you've even spoken them aloud. It feels like fate. It feels like alignment. And maybe it is, but not in the way we usually think. Because what's aligning isn't two souls. It's their unconscious meeting your presence and saying yes. This pull is mysterious, but not random. Carl Jung believed we're drawn to people who embody the fragments of ourselves we've left behind. Not because we're meant to become them, but because we need to remember. You become the key, not the door, the signpost, not the destination. You, just by existing, remind them of something unfinished in themselves. Maybe strength, maybe softness, maybe the freedom they buried as a child, or the wildness they were told to hide. That's why it can feel so intense, so immediate. It's not logic at work, it's longing. And longing speaks louder than reason, louder than compatibility, louder than timing. The soul doesn't care if you're available or if they're ready. It just responds, instinctively, irresistibly, like a compass snapping back to true north. And that's where things begin, in the quiet, unexplained resonance between two people. One becomes the mirror, the other sees a forgotten self, and neither fully understands why they feel so known. It doesn't matter how prepared you are, how grounded, how rational. When this force touches your life, it moves fast. It's not just romance, it's recognition, on a level beyond words, as if their heart was searching for a specific chord and you struck it without trying. But here's where it gets dangerous. When you don't know what you're representing, when they don't know what they're searching for, when both of you are swept into a current, powered by memories and dreams and ghosts and needs neither of you can name. That's when love stops being connection and becomes projection. That's when the image grows more powerful than the person. And that's when the fall begins, not into each other, but into the depths of the psyche. So tonight, we begin there, at the edge of awareness, with a question: what if someone's love for you isn't about you at all? What if it's about a silent image you happen to carry? And what happens when that image begins to crack? That's the pull you never chose. But now you're here. So let's keep going. You may think people are looking for love, but really, they are looking for wholeness. And when they find you, it's not because you are whole, it's because you fit into their outline of what they are missing. Everyone walks through life with invisible gaps in their psyche, things they've abandoned, things they've repressed, things they never got to develop because life moved them too quickly, past innocence, past curiosity, past softness. You become the placeholder for a forgotten piece of their internal puzzle. And they don't even know it. What we call chemistry is often just psychic recognition. Something buried in them nods toward you and says, yes, that one. You may remind them of a feeling they haven't felt in years. Maybe it's the calm they lost in childhood. Maybe it's the fire they extinguished to survive. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be conscious. In fact, it rarely is. Think about it. Why else would someone fall so hard, so fast for a person who seems completely out of sync with their rational needs? Why do people walk away from stable, loving relationships for a chaotic pull they can't explain? Why do we feel magnetized by someone who doesn't even match our stated values or desires? Because the soul doesn't crave compatibility. It craves completion. And completion doesn't mean someone who mirrors you. It often means someone who represents your opposite. Not because opposites attract, but because they reveal. They shine light on what you've kept hidden. They stir the parts of you that are asleep. If you're too structured, you may fall for someone wild. If you're too self-contained, you may ache for someone emotionally open. If you've been living in your head, you might crave someone who makes you feel something in your body again. This is what Jung meant when he said the psyche seeks integration, not comfort, integration. The bringing together of all our parts. And that journey often begins through other people. They become the mirror, and love becomes the spark. But here's where it gets messy. You are not the person they're in love with. You are the carrier of a trait they've lost or never developed. The love is real, yes. The pull is undeniable. But the image they've built of you, consciously or not, has little to do with your truth. They don't see your contradictions, your chaos, your shadow. They see the symbol. They see what they need to see. And that's both beautiful and dangerous. Because what happens when the symbol speaks back? You are not a fantasy. You are a person. With moods, with scars, with edges that don't fit their illusion. And eventually those edges begin to show. You say something they didn't expect. You act in a way that doesn't match the version of you they created in their mind. You start to break character in the script they handed you without realizing, and the dissonance begins. But let's not go there just yet. Let's stay with the beginning. The quiet, sacred moment where something in them recognizes something in you. Not your personality, not your goals, not your style, but your energy, your archetype, your echo. You, standing there, become a psychological invitation. And they accept. They move toward you not because they're ready for love, but because they are ready for growth. And sometimes growth disguises itself as romance. You may represent softness to someone who has lived in armor. You may represent boldness to someone who has always played small. You may represent mystery, calm, joy, even pain, whatever they are unconsciously drawn toward in this moment of their evolution. The hard truth, they don't always know why. They may tell themselves it's your laugh, or your kindness, or the way you make them feel seen. And yes, those things matter. But beneath that is the psychic mechanism pulling the strings. Beneath that is the part of their soul that said, this one will wake me up. And so love begins. It feels serendipitous, cosmic, inevitable, as if the universe lined things up perfectly. But really, it's the unconscious guiding the moment. The needs that have been waiting in silence finally finding an outlet. And it feels like destiny, not because it's planned, but because it's overdue. A reunion, not between two people, but between a person and their missing self. So what about you? You may be walking into this connection unaware. You may just be being yourself. You may not understand why they light up around you, why they seem intoxicated by your presence, why their attention clings to you like warmth in winter. But something in you is doing the work, without effort, without knowledge, just by existing. That's the power of resonance. It's not loud, it's not even intentional, it's quiet and deep and invisible, like gravity. It doesn't ask permission, it just pulls. And if you're paying attention, you'll start to notice this pattern in more than just romance. People are drawn to teachers, to friends, to strangers in the exact same way. We all carry emotional signatures. Some of us carry joy, others have forgotten. Some carry anger, others need to express. Some carry stillness, some carry chaos, some carry love. We are walking invitations for one another to return home to the self. And so every attraction becomes a chance, not to be completed, but to be revealed. You become a reflection. They fall in love not with your story, but with the chapter they need to write for themselves. And in doing so, they begin a journey, sometimes with you, sometimes through you, sometimes beyond you. But it all starts here, with the silent ache for wholeness, with you standing there unaware of the role you've just stepped into, with love arriving not as a choice, but as a signal that it's time to grow. It's easy to believe someone falls for you because of your smile, your timing, your kindness. But more often than not, that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is that you've stepped into a shape they didn't know they were missing. You've become the answer to a question they never asked out loud. You've become the warmth to a part of themselves that has lived in cold silence for years. And that's why it feels so intense, so fast, so complete. But here's the part no one wants to admit. Most of the time, attraction isn't really about you. It's about them, about what's unhealed, what's undeveloped, what's been forgotten. You are not their destination. You're a doorway. And they step through without realizing that what they're chasing on the outside actually lives inside. They think you're magnetic, but what's pulling them is the version of themselves they see reflected in your presence. They feel safe around you, but what they're feeling is the safety they've long craved internally. They think you're rare, but what's rare is the feeling they've lost contact with: freedom, joy, fire, or peace. And somehow you've reignited it. This is why it's so hard to separate love from illusion. We're all trained to believe that love is something personal, that it's about the qualities we bring to the table. But if someone is projecting, then their love for you is not a recognition of who you are. It's a reflection of who they want to be, or who they once were, or who they're afraid they'll never become. That doesn't make the love fake. That doesn't make it less beautiful. It makes it incomplete. Because when someone falls in love with an idea, they don't make space for the full reality of you. The minute your humanity starts to speak up, when you need space, when you say no, when you express something they didn't expect, the image begins to crack. And if they were never in love with the truth of you, but only with the idea of you, then that crack feels like betrayal. It feels like confusion. It feels like loss, even though what they're losing wasn't real to begin with. This is why some people cling so hard to you in the beginning. They're not holding you, they're holding what you represent, the hope, the fantasy, the lost piece of themselves. And that attachment isn't light, it's loaded with years of unmet needs. And you'll feel it. You'll feel the weight in their gaze, the urgency in their voice, the tenderness in their touch that doesn't feel earned, it feels inherited, as if you've walked into a story that began long before you showed up. This is projection. Jung called it the unconscious transference of inner contents onto another person. It's not conscious, it's not chosen, it just happens. Because we are always trying to integrate, always trying to become whole. And sometimes the psyche tries to do that by writing another person into the story as the missing link. You become their possibility. And if you don't see what's happening, you'll start to believe it. You'll think you're this incredible person. You'll think you've finally been seen. You'll think you're the cure, the light, the reason they're healing. And maybe in a way, you are, but only as a symbol, not as a savior. And the moment you forget that, You become a prisoner to their projection. Because the truth is this, they never really saw you. They saw what they needed to see. And that's why their love feels so overwhelming. Because it's not about your traits. It's about their needs, their wounds, their longing, their desire to become whole again. You were a mirror that smiled back. But mirrors don't hold weight, and eventually, someone has to look away. This is why so many relationships that start with euphoria end in confusion. Why the people who once adored you can't even understand why they felt what they felt. Why what seemed like fate turns to distance. They weren't in love with you. They were in love with what you made them feel. And when that feeling fades, because all projections must fade, they're left with the truth. And sometimes that truth is too ordinary, too human, too real. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with a choice. You can chase the feeling of being adored. You can try to stay inside the fantasy, playing the role they cast you in. Or you can step back and see it for what it is, a moment of resonance, a psychic echo, a beautiful, fleeting mirror of someone else's inner world. And you can choose not to hold it too tightly, because love based on projection always starts high, but it doesn't land softly. It crashes. And in the ruins, both people are left wondering where the magic went. But the magic didn't go anywhere. It was never yours to hold. It was theirs, sparked by you, lit by you, but belonging to their own soul's journey. And now you know. So the next time someone looks at you like they've just seen the sun rise for the first time, ask yourself, what part of themselves are they seeing in me? What have I awakened in them that they forgot they carried? And more importantly, can I let that be enough without needing to become the fantasy? Because love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it just means reminding. It begins quietly, before the first word is spoken, before the first moment shared. When someone sees you, really sees you, and feels something stir in their chest that they can't name. What you don't realize is that this isn't a new feeling. It's ancient, stored deep in their unconscious, a pattern, an ache, a forgotten dream. And you, just by existing in front of them, brush against it. This is when the inner world spills out. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to perform. You just have to be present. And their mind begins to fill in the blanks. They map meaning onto your face. They pour memory into your silence. They lace every word you say with significance. It's not you they're hearing. It's the echo of every unmet need, every repressed emotion, every unresolved story they've ever carried. That's the nature of the unconscious. It doesn't speak in clear sentences. It speaks in symbols, in attraction, in energy. And when someone feels magnetized toward you, it's because their unconscious has recognized something familiar, something important, something that demands attention. You become the projection screen. But the film that plays, that's theirs. You may remind them of a parent's affection they never fully received, or the voice of a childhood friend who made them feel safe. You may echo the excitement of a first love or the pain of a last goodbye. Without meaning to, you awaken all of it. You become the person who carries their old story forward. And that's why the connection feels bigger than life, because it isn't rooted in this moment. It's built on all the moments that came before. There's nothing wrong with this. It's human. It's how we process what we couldn't understand the first time around. We meet people, and those people become symbols. We place our past inside them, and we try desperately to make sense of what once left us confused or broken. But you can't fix the past by holding on to a person who wasn't there. And that's where the pain begins, because sooner or later, the cracks will show. The illusion can only hold so long. And when the real you begins to rise, complex, imperfect, honest, it disrupts the fantasy. The unconscious doesn't like that. It fights back, tries to reshape you, tries to hold on to the image, not because the person is cruel, but because they're scared. Because letting go of the fantasy means facing the pain that created it. And yet that's exactly what needs to happen. Carl Jung taught that projection is a necessary part of psychological development. We project what we can't face within. And we do this not just to avoid pain, but to see it from the outside, to interact with it, to learn from it. You, as the person receiving that projection, become the teacher. Not through lessons, but through presence, through reflection, through eventually not living up to what they imagined. It sounds harsh, but it's beautiful in its own way. Because even when the fantasy breaks, growth begins. They start to realize that what they loved wasn't you, it was a part of themselves. And if they're willing to do the work, they can begin to take that part back, to develop it, to stop searching for it in others, and to become more whole. But that only happens if they're conscious, if they're aware, if they're willing to look beneath the surface. Most aren't. Most run. Because it's easier to find a new person to project onto than to face the hard truth that the love they're chasing is self-love in disguise. And that's the tragedy of unconscious attraction. It loops, it repeats. You fall for someone who reflects your missing part, and when the mirror no longer shines, you move on, never realizing that the mirror wasn't supposed to shine forever. It was supposed to break, so you could finally look inward. And you might be left wondering what happened. Why did they pull away? Why did they change? Why did their affection turn cold? It's not because you failed, it's because you succeeded. You played the role their psyche needed in that moment. You reflected what they weren't ready to see. And when it became too real, too clear, too human, they backed away. Don't take that personally. You weren't supposed to be permanent. You were supposed to be transformative. And that's a very different kind of love. It's not the kind that holds hands through time. It's the kind that shifts the soul, the kind that awakens something, the kind that breaks the pattern. You might never be thanked for it, but you will be remembered. So when someone stares at you like they've known you forever, ask yourself, what are they trying to find? What story are they pulling you into? And are you willing to be the symbol, knowing that the ending might not be soft? Because when the inner world spills out, it's messy, it's overwhelming, it's holy. You become both mirror and myth. And whether they walk with you or walk away, they won't walk the same. You've touched something that can't be untouched. And that's the beginning of real change. You might not feel like a mirror. You might just feel like yourself, doing your best, living your days, being kind when you can and quiet when you must. But mirrors don't announce themselves. They don't glow or warn or ask permission. They simply reflect. And sometimes what someone sees in your reflection is a version of themselves they haven't met yet, or one they've forgotten, or buried, or feared. This is why the pull feels so magnetic. You're not showing them something foreign. You're showing them something familiar, a piece of their own inner world that they've kept hidden. Maybe because they weren't ready. Maybe because it wasn't safe. Maybe because they never knew it was even there. And then you arrive, and without trying you speak to it. Not always in words, sometimes in presence, in how you move through the world, in how you laugh, in how you dare to feel, to express, to exist in a way they've never given themselves permission to. You become resonance. Jung believed that the unconscious isn't just a storehouse of repressed trauma, it's also a reservoir of potential. And within that potential live qualities, energies, desires we've never developed. Maybe we were too busy. Maybe we were told not to. Maybe life just didn't allow it. So we forget, we adapt, we armor up, but the longing remains, quiet, persistent, waiting. And then someone walks into the room and brings it all to life. That's what you are. You don't have to be extraordinary. You just have to be aligned with what they've disowned. That's what creates the shockwave, the intensity, the falling. They're not falling for you, they're falling through you, into themselves. And it's not always comfortable, because what's familiar isn't always easy. Sometimes you reflect what they've feared, a voice that says things they've always silenced, a softness they've always shamed, a power they've tried to shrink. You become the embodiment of what they've told themselves they're not allowed to be. And that contradiction creates fire. Attraction can be born from admiration, yes, but also from tension, from resistance, from the parts of us we're trying to suppress. That's why some of the most intense chemistry lives in opposites. Not because opposites attract for fun, but because they unsettle, they awaken, they activate the unconscious. And in that activation, people lose track of what's real. You might notice it in their eyes. That glimmer that's not really about you, it's about what you represent. You say something simple and they light up. You stand in silence and they feel safe. You do something ordinary and they act like it's magic. You feel like you're being watched through a lens you didn't sign up for. And you are. Because once projection begins, it colors everything. They no longer hear your voice, they hear their dreams speaking. They no longer see your flaws, they edit them out to preserve the image. They don't know they're doing it. That's the trick. Projection isn't deception, it's not manipulation, it's unconscious storytelling. They think they're in love with you, but they're in love with the version of themselves they believe you can unlock. And that's powerful, that's sacred, that's dangerous. Because when someone relies on you to reflect their hidden self, they begin to expect it, they begin to need it. Not because they're weak, but because it feels like wholeness. It feels like coming home. And if they haven't done the inner work, they won't realize that the home they're feeling doesn't live in you, it lives in them. You just reminded them how to find the door. But they may not see it that way. They may begin to depend on you, to draw strength from your presence, to lose balance without it. And when that happens, love becomes something else, not connection, not intimacy, but survival. And that kind of love isn't sustainable. It's not shared, it's absorbed. It takes and can never quite be satisfied. And you'll start to feel it. That pressure to stay consistent, to be the same every day, to never change, never shift, never step out of the role. Because if you do, the mirror cracks and the fantasy falters. And they begin to pull away. Not because you failed, but because the illusion can't stretch any further. But this is where your power lies. To recognize the projection, to hold compassion for it, and to choose whether you want to remain in the story or not. Because you don't owe anyone the version of you they've created in their mind. You owe them your truth, even if it's messy, even if it disrupts the narrative, even if it means they walk away. You are not responsible for what your presence awakens. You are only responsible for how you respond. So when someone mirrors themselves through you, pause, look gently, ask quietly, what are they seeing? Is it me? Or is it a part of them they lost and want back? And do I have the strength to let them see me anyway, fully, truthfully, even if it means breaking the spell? Because real love doesn't need a mirror. It sees the person standing there, without projections, without illusions, without needing them to be anything but what they are. And sometimes letting go of the role is the most loving thing you can do. Even if they don't understand, even if they remember you not as who you were, but as who they needed you to be. You were a mirror, and then maybe you were a catalyst. And that is more than enough. At a certain point, the story deepens, the surface starts to tremble, and you begin to feel it. Not in your mind, but in your gut. The energy shifts, the looks linger longer, the silences stretch thinner. You start to feel like you're being watched not as a person, but as a symbol, a vessel for something someone else doesn't fully understand. This is the stage where Jung's anima and animus rise from the depths. You may not see them, but they are there. The anima, the unconscious feminine in a man's psyche. The animus, the unconscious masculine in a woman's. These are not characters, not cliches. They are archetypes, ancient psychological blueprints shaped by 1,000 quiet moments, childhood glances, parental patterns, cultural myths, lifetimes of inherited emotion stored and waiting. These figures carry more weight than any real person ever could, because they are charged with longing, with power, with expectation. And sometimes someone looks at you and sees not a person, but the embodiment of their inner archetype. That's when it begins to feel surreal. You say something small and they hear prophecy. You laugh and it sounds like music they've been missing for years. You walk into the room and they act like the sun just rose for the first time. This isn't just romance, it's worship. And it's deeply unconscious. They don't know they're projecting their anima or animus onto you. They don't know why they feel the way they feel. All they know is you feel like home, like meaning, like mystery. But it's not about you. It's about a figure they've carried inside for years. You just happen to light it up. Jung believed these archetypes develop early. They're shaped by our relationship to the opposite sex parent or dominant emotional caretaker. A man with a nurturing mother may internalize an anima that is soft, intuitive, wise. A woman with a critical father may form an animus that is harsh, judgmental, intellectual. Over time, these archetypes become our internal compass. They influence who we're drawn to, who we avoid, who we dream about, who we fall for, again and again. And when someone meets you and senses that internal image mirrored in your presence, something powerful happens. Recognition. not of you, but of the inner figure you unknowingly resemble. You become the stage upon which their psyche plays out an ancient script. Their emotions swell, their thoughts speed up, their fantasies take flight, and you're just standing there, unaware that you've become the canvas for someone else's myth. That's why the love feels so intense. It's not built on shared values or compatibility, it's built on archetypal resonance. And archetypes don't think, they feel, they ache, they pull with a force older than logic. The danger? You can't live up to an archetype. No one can. Anima and animus are not real people. They're idealized, exaggerated. They live in symbols, not bodies. They're fluid, not grounded. So the moment your real humanity emerges, your needs, your flaws, your contradictions, the image begins to crack. And when the image cracks, so does the connection. Because the love wasn't for you. It was for the role you unknowingly agreed to play. And it happens fast. One day they're enamored. The next, disillusioned. They feel betrayed, but can't explain why. You haven't changed, but the projection has. Their inner figure doesn't recognize you anymore. You no longer carry the glow. The psychic charge fades, and they may begin to withdraw, to criticize, to rewrite the story so they can protect the image they thought they found in you. This is the heartbreak of unconscious attraction. You never meant to deceive. You never promised to be perfect. But the psyche doesn't care. It's looking for symbols, not facts. It doesn't want who you are. It wants what you represent. And still, the experience is sacred, because even if it ends in confusion, it began with something real, a cry from the unconscious, a call toward integration. Even if the relationship doesn't survive, the awakening might. You may stir something in them that leads to healing, to reflection, to growth. You may become the turning point they look back on, not because you were flawless, but because you opened a door, and you might experience the same. You might meet someone who feels like destiny, who fits your inner image with eerie precision, who makes you feel seen, not as you are, but as you imagine yourself at your best. And in that seeing, you come alive. You begin to believe in possibilities again. You become bolder, softer, wiser. Not because they made you so, but because they unlocked something that was already inside you. That's the power of the archetype. It doesn't just mislead, it transforms. And when the spell fades, when the projection collapses, what remains is the invitation. To take back what you gave away, to reclaim the parts of yourself you tried to find in another, to become what you were projecting. Because the truth is, the anima and animus don't belong out there. They live inside. And every time we fall in love with a symbol of them, we're being shown what we must now develop in ourselves. So the next time someone falls in love with you, and it feels fast, furious, almost mythic, pause. Look deeper. Ask, what inner figure have I awakened in them? And what might this moment be asking both of us to reclaim? Because love, when viewed through Jung's lens, is not the end. It's the mirror that shatters. And in the shards we see ourselves. The illusion always breaks. Not because anyone meant to break it, not because love wasn't strong, but because illusions are built on fragile things, on assumptions, on fantasies, on dreams that were never tested by time or truth. And eventually, reality shows up, not with cruelty, but with quiet insistence, with missed calls, with bad days, with moments when you speak your real mind instead of playing the role. And suddenly, the person who once saw you as the answer doesn't understand you anymore. This is the danger of projection. It feels like love, but it isn't rooted in who you actually are. It's rooted in how well you match a story. And the problem with stories is they don't adjust easily. When you begin to show depth, when you express something that doesn't fit the image, they feel it like a betrayal. Not because you lied, but because the lie lived inside them, quietly, all along. They projected, and now the projection is breaking. Maybe you cry at the wrong moment. Maybe you don't support a dream they held close. Maybe you laugh too loud, or not enough, or in a way they didn't imagine. These things aren't wrong, they're human. But when someone's love for you is based on who they thought you were, not who you actually are, then every new layer of truth feels like a threat. It begins subtly. They pause more, they hesitate. Their eyes don't meet yours with the same certainty. You can feel them searching, not for connection, but for confirmation that you're still the one they imagined. And when they can't find it, something shifts. You are no longer safe, not because of something you did, but because you've disrupted the fantasy. And fantasies don't like contradiction. They like simplicity, predictability. They like their chosen image to stay still and shiny and soft. But you're not still. You're not flat. You're alive. And aliveness breaks illusions. This is when love turns confusing. They might pull away without explanation. They might pick fights. They might accuse you of changing, when in truth, you were only just beginning to be seen. They might say, "You're not who I thought you were." And you'll want to scream, "I never was." But they won't hear it, because they're grieving, not the loss of you, but the loss of their inner image. And they don't know how to mourn something that never really existed. So they place the pain onto you. They rewrite the story. They make you the mistake, the disappointment, the distortion. It hurts. Of course it hurts, because for a while it felt real. You saw the way they looked at you, and you believed it. You felt their love, and you held it close. And maybe a part of you started playing along, hoping it could last. But it can't. Not when it's built on a version of you that was never fully yours. And now you're here, standing in the space between who they wanted and who you are, between their ideal and your truth, between the fantasy and the mirror. This is where things either break or deepen. Because not all projection ends in collapse. Some projections, when noticed, can be worked through. If both people are conscious, if both are willing to sit in the discomfort, to acknowledge the illusions, to choose each other not for who they thought they found, but for who is really standing there. But that rarely happens. More often the break comes swift and quiet, a distancing, a disappearance, a confusion that never finds resolution. You'll question everything. Was it love? Was it just fantasy? Did they care at all? And the answer is yes, they did care, deeply, intensely, but not always for you, often for what you represented. And that kind of care isn't sustainable. It flickers, burns, then fades. So what can you do? You mourn, you breathe. You stop trying to shrink yourself back into the image they once adored. You stop apologizing for growing beyond their fantasy, and you begin to see the truth, that being loved for a projection is never enough. That being idealized is not the same as being seen. That real love cannot begin until illusion ends. And that's the secret gift in the breaking. Because once the illusion collapses, you are finally free. Free to be known, free to be flawed, free to be complex, and free to find connection that doesn't rely on archetypes or projections, but on presence, mutual recognition, willingness to see and to be seen. Jung said we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the moment when that darkness becomes visible, when the glow of being idealized fades, and you are left with the raw, honest, unedited truth. And if someone chooses you here, if they stay, if they lean in, if they begin to ask, "Who are you really?" then something real can begin. But if they walk, let them walk. You were not born to be a symbol in someone else's story. You were born to live your truth, even if that truth isn't shiny, even if it doesn't match their dream. So don't hold on to a love that demands you be less than real. Let it go. Let the illusion fall. And know this, you didn't fail. You just stopped performing. And that is the beginning of something deeper than love. It's the beginning of being seen. You were never just a person to them. Not really. From the very beginning, you were more than your words, more than your face, more than your habits and your voice and your laugh. You were a symbol, a turning point, a signpost planted right in the path of their inner journey. You became the representation of something ancient stirring inside them, something they couldn't name but felt deeply. And because of that, your presence took on weight. This isn't flattery. This isn't romance. It's psychology, archetypal, spiritual, and heavy. Because once you become a symbol to someone, they stop interacting with you directly. They start interacting with the version of you their unconscious has chosen to construct. And that version, perfect, charged, mythic, is more about them than you. More about their past, their wounds, their unmet needs, and the fantasies they've quietly built to survive them. You become a carrier of meaning, a screen upon which they project their longing, their memory, their pain, and yes, their hope. So when you walk into their life, it feels sacred, electrifying, as if you were always meant to arrive. Because for them, you weren't just a person. You were the pattern made visible, the emotion made flesh, the inner image come to life. This is why it feels like soul recognition. Not because your souls are destined, but because you awaken something they've been carrying silently. You embody a shape they've dreamt of in quiet moments, not even knowing they were dreaming. Maybe you match their anima or animus. Maybe you reflect the mother who never saw them, or the father who never came home. Maybe you echo the sibling they lost, or the innocence they buried. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. You are seen not as yourself, but as a relic of their unconscious. And that gives you power. But it's not real power. It's borrowed. It's illusion. It's charged by their inner world, not by your actions. And the moment you act outside that charge, disagree, detach, disapprove, you are no longer sacred. You are human. And for someone living in projection, that shift is devastating. Because they weren't loving you. They were loving the idea of you. And when the idea falters, so does the connection. This is where confusion enters. They might pull back, grow cold, turn distant. You'll feel the change before it's spoken. You'll notice how their gaze dims, how the spark fades, and you'll wonder what you did wrong. But you didn't do anything. You just stopped being a mirror. Or rather, you became a mirror that reflected something they didn't want to see. Because at first you reflected hope, longing, beauty. Now you reflect reality, their expectations, their unhealed pain, their own inability to hold contradiction. And that's hard, not just for them, but for you. Because you might have fallen too. You might have felt the pull. You might have started believing in the magic. You might have confused the symbol with real intimacy. And now you're caught in the in-between, where one person is grieving the loss of their fantasy, and the other is grieving the loss of being adored. You miss being the symbol. You miss being seen with that kind of awe. But awe fades. It must. Because awe requires distance. And real love asks us to step closer, to see the cracks, the edges, the full complicated landscape of another human being. When someone loves the real you, not the idea, not the projection, they don't stand back and wonder. They step forward in recognition. And that's a different kind of sacred, quieter, slower, truer. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with the realization that love based on projection is not failure. It's transition. It's the first act of a deeper play. And sometimes it's the only act. Because not everyone makes it to the next stage. Not everyone can hold the weight of real connection. But the fact that you were chosen as the symbol, that you were cast in the story of their transformation, that means something. It means you carry a charge, a resonance, a presence that activates something deeper in others. That's not something to chase, not something to manipulate, not something to take lightly. It's something to understand, to hold with care. Because people will see in you what they need to see. And you cannot stop that. What you can do is choose not to become the fantasy. You can stay grounded in your truth. You can notice when someone is idealizing you and gently, compassionately, let them see more. Let them see your edges, your questions, your contradictions, your full, living presence. Because the people who stay after that, after the symbol breaks and the real you rises, those are the ones who are choosing you, not their image of you. And that choice, that's where love actually begins. So if someone once looked at you like you were their salvation and now looks away, let them. Bless the role you played. Grieve the loss. But don't chase the symbol. Don't try to become what they imagine. You don't owe anyone the architecture of their own unconscious. You are not a monument. You are not a metaphor. You are a mirror that eventually must show the truth. And when you do, what remains is not fantasy. It's possibility. Possibility for real connection, real reflection, real growth. And that's more powerful than any projection will ever be. You may never hear them say thank you. You may never get a letter, a text, a whisper of recognition for what your presence gave them. But make no mistake, you gave them something. You woke something, stirred something. You were the crack in the surface of their ordinary world. And that crack, no matter how things ended, became an opening, a space where growth could begin. Because even when someone projects onto you, even when they love a version of you that isn't fully real, something inside them is still moving, still shifting, still learning. And that shift matters. They may not stay, they may not understand, they may walk away confused, disappointed, even bitter. But you were still the mirror that made their unconscious visible. You were still the moment they felt something deep enough to make them question everything. You were still the presence that held up the image of what they were missing, and in doing so, gave them a chance, just a chance, to start looking inward. That's the real gift you gave. Not comfort, not consistency, but interruption, transformation, a psychological invitation dressed up as chemistry. And maybe it didn't end gently. Maybe it ended in silence, in a goodbye that never came, in a sudden coldness that left you reeling. But that doesn't erase the impact. The mirror still reflected, the echoes still rang out. And even if they never say it aloud, they felt it, deeply. Probably more than you'll ever know, because the psyche remembers what the ego forgets. They'll carry you, not as a regret, not even necessarily as a lost love, but as a symbol of the moment their inner world cracked open. You became the spark that set a slow fire to the parts of themselves they hadn't touched in years. And though you may never see the result, that fire keeps burning, quietly, patiently, doing the work you started just by showing up. That's the power of being someone's mirror. You don't have to state a matter. You don't have to be perfect to leave a mark. You just have to be true to yourself, to your timing, to your edge. And what you give by being that real, that present, that reflective, it goes far beyond what most people know how to acknowledge, especially in the moment, especially when they're still inside the unraveling. But give it anyway. Let your presence be the rupture, the invitation, the symbol that breaks the loop, because everyone is stuck in a loop until they're not, until someone like you appears and disrupts the pattern. And in that disruption, they start to remember. They remember a softness they buried, a strength they avoided, a voice they silenced. They remember who they were before the masks, the roles, the fear. And maybe that memory hurts, but it's also healing, because pain, when it wakes up the soul, becomes purpose. You didn't rescue them. That was never your job. But you did offer a glimpse of something sacred, a version of wholeness they could feel, even if only for a moment, in your presence. And sometimes a moment is enough to plant a seed, enough to shift a perspective, enough to start a new path. And that seed grows, even when you're gone, especially when you're gone. Because now the image is broken, the symbol has cracked, and they are left with the choice: rebuild the fantasy with someone new, or go deeper into themselves. And if they choose the latter, then everything changes. They stop searching outside for what was missing inside. They stop chasing the projection. They start becoming. That's the echo of your presence. Long after the text threads end, long after the silence settles, long after your face becomes a memory. Your effect remains, not because of what you gave, but because of what you awakened. And that's worth honoring, even if no one claps, even if no one sees, because you see, you know what you were, and you know what you gave. So hold that gently. Let yourself feel the sorrow of not being truly seen. Let yourself grieve the role you played and the parts of yourself that got wrapped up in it. But also, stand in quiet pride, because you offered more than attraction, more than attention. You offered transformation. And no matter how quietly it began, no matter how silently it ended, that energy doesn't vanish. It lives in the psyche of the person you touched, and it changes them. Maybe slowly, maybe painfully, but it changes them. You were the mirror, and you were the moment, and that moment echoes. And what about you? You're not just the one being projected onto. You're not just the symbol in someone else's story. You fall too. You stumble. You meet someone, and something inside you shifts without permission. You feel the spark, the pull, the deep and irrational certainty that this person, this moment, means more than it should. And just like them, you begin to pour parts of yourself into their presence. Unconsciously, automatically, inevitably. You fall in love not with them, but with what they represent, with the freedom they show you, with the power they carry, with the feeling they evoke, something you haven't felt in years, or maybe never at all. And suddenly they become a symbol, the mirror, the echo, the catalyst. And you don't see it right away. At first it feels like fate, like meeting someone who sees you finally, who makes you feel full, warm, alive. But in time, if you're honest, you'll notice the gaps between who they are and who you've imagined. And those gaps will grow. They always do. Because no one can live up to the projection you've cast, just like you couldn't live up to theirs. It's hard to admit, harder still to watch it unravel, because your love was real. Your feelings were real, but so was the illusion. And the moment you realize you are falling in love with an image, not a whole person, everything tilts. The ground beneath your feet shifts. You begin to question, was any of it true? Yes and no, because the emotion was true. The story was not. What you felt was valid. What you believed was only partly yours. Jung would call this the beginning of individuation. The moment when you stop chasing the image outside yourself and start reclaiming the pieces you've been giving away. You start to understand what you loved in them was already living inside you, dormant, hidden, waiting to be seen. And now that it's awake, it's yours. This is the turning point. When you begin to see the pattern, when you realize how many times you've fallen not for a person, but for a projection. When you stop asking why they couldn't love you and start asking, what was I trying to love in myself? What did I see in them that I thought I couldn't be? Maybe you saw their confidence, their calm, their wildness. Maybe you saw their mystery or kindness or ability to live without apology. And maybe what pulled you in wasn't desire, it was memory of a version of you that got buried, of a possibility you'd forgotten. And that's beautiful, because now instead of chasing that feeling in others, you begin to bring it back home. You become your own mirror. You learn to embody what you were seeking, to develop what you admired, to nurture what you envied. And love stops being a search, it becomes a practice, a returning. And when that happens, everything changes. You stop getting stuck in loops. You stop mistaking chemistry for destiny. You stop giving your power to people who were never meant to carry it. And you start to love differently, slower, truer, not because it's easier, but because it's real. You stop falling in love with people who represent your pain. And you start building love with people who respect your growth. People who meet you not with fantasy, but with presence. People who aren't trying to complete you because they're already complete in themselves. And those relationships feel different. They're quieter, gentler, sometimes less euphoric, but they last because they're built on truth, not archetype, on shared awareness, not unconscious need, on the willingness to look at one another and say, I see you, not who I want you to be, not who I need you to be, just you. That kind of love is rare, but it's possible, and it starts with this, becoming aware of your projections, of your inner figures, of the patterns that live beneath your preferences. It starts with watching who you're drawn to and asking why, not to judge, but to understand, to grow, to return, because you don't have to stay in the loop. You don't have to keep chasing ghosts. You don't have to keep falling for mirrors. You can fall into yourself. And from that place, the next person you love won't be a symbol. They'll be a soul, meeting yours with eyes open, with heart steady, with no fantasy to protect, just truth to share. And that, in the end, is the deepest love. Not the one that saves you, the one that sees you, the one that says, I love what you awaken in me, and I love you too. So the next time you feel that pull, that spark, that sudden gravity, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what part of me is waking up right now? What is it about this person that feels familiar? What am I projecting? And if the answer reveals a part of yourself you're ready to reclaim, then you'll know. This love, whatever form it takes, is not a detour. It's a direction toward wholeness, toward truth, toward home. So just breathe now. Let it all soften. Let the thoughts unwind. The story settle into your chest like a quiet hum. You don't need to hold it all at once. Just a thread, a whisper, an echo of something you might return to later when the world is a little quieter and your heart is ready again. You've seen how love isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's about you, about what you're remembering, about what you're finally ready to feel. And that's a tender thing, a holy thing. So hold it gently. No need to rush toward answers. Just let the images float. Let the pieces fall where they may. You're doing fine. And if someone once loved you for who they imagined you to be, take it as a compliment from the unconscious. You were the right kind of mirror, the right kind of dream. But now it's time to wake. Gently, fully, because your reflection matters too. And the people who see it, clearly, truly, without the veil, those are the ones worth walking with. So rest now. Let that truth stay with you. You are not just a symbol. You are someone worth being seen.